And the Romans were an incredibly egotistical race back in their day. They documented everything that they did. All the obelisks they moved from Egypt over to Rome and everything. They have whole accounts of how they did this and how many people died and what an incredible feat of engineering it was to move this thing. So if they managed to put the trilithon, the three largest carved stones in existence, 26 feet high in a wall in Lebanon, in Baalbek, they certainly would have recorded the event, and they didn't. So obviously it wasn't built by them. It was built by a culture that existed before the Roman Empire. So what happened there? There's just no record of any of this stuff that we can rely on anywhere to be found. And again, this is probably one of the reasons why they're going out of their way to destroy the Middle East as much as they can and destroy all trace of these ancient sites, but they literally are everywhere. There's many, many ancient sites all across the Middle East, but many of them you just can't get to because they're constantly kept in a war zone. And as I mentioned before, you've got vitrified ruins right across Europe. You've got all sorts of strange stuff in Europe and all sorts of strange stuff in England as well. You've got Salisbury Hill. You've got some very interesting structures around the south of England. You've got Stonehenge, but of course it's hard to take Stonehenge into account and put that where it really belongs or figure out even where it does belong, because Stonehenge was rebuilt in the 1940s or 1950s. A lot of people don't know that. But Stonehenge was actually moved and rebuilt, and all the stones were put up, and it wasn't anything like what it is now in as recently as the 1930s. I think it was the 1940s and the 1950s. There was a historical society that decided it would be a good tourist attraction if they rebuilt it. So you can't really tell from that. But there are vitrified fortresses to be found in Scotland. And there's also the mud flood that I've mentioned recently. Now, this is a new finding for me, which has really caused me to question the timeline. Because if there's been a mud flood go across Europe as recently as 500 years ago, and nobody knows about it, well, what was civilization like before that, as recently as 500 years ago? And as I said, there's been remnants of this flood found in Russia, found in Holland, where I'm staying at the moment, found in Italy, found in Spain, found in France. So this is like 12 feet of mud that appears to have gone right across Europe and buried an entire floor of many cities. And they just simply moved the roads and moved everything up another level and rebuilt everything and didn't tell anyone it had happened. Well, I guess everyone that lived at the time noticed, I would say so, but it doesn't seem to have made their history books, and that's something very interesting as well. And if that mud flood happened as recently as 500 years ago, then you've got to question, when did the Great Flood happen? The flood that everybody talks about, the flood of Noah. And this flood did happen because it exists in all cultures. It's in all mythologies from all cultures. I mean, even the American Indians talk about the Great Flood. So we know it happened. The question is, when did it happen? How long ago did Atlantis sink? How long ago did Lemuria sink beneath the waves? What is the timeline? Because it really doesn't seem to be anything like what we're told it is, and it really does seem that it's out by at least 1,000 years. They've just inserted 1,000 years in there and told us certain things are 2,000 years old when they're only really 1,000 years old, or possibly even less. And if this is the case, well, again, the question is why? What's the point of hiding history? What purpose does it serve, really? And these may seem like esoteric ramblings. I mean, you might ask the question, what's the point? Who cares what history is? We're here now, let's just do the best with what we've got, and that's all very well. But, I mean, if you can't think of any really valid reason for them to hide history, well, then you have to ask the question, well, then why did they go to so much trouble to do so? There must be a reason for it, that's the thing. And that fact alone makes it important to ask the question. You know, George Orwell once said, who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. Perhaps there's a clue there. You know, I've often asked the question, why is the Earth being strip mined? This is something that I said in the film that I put out, The Awakening. Why is the Earth being strip mined? What are we doing with all this stuff that we pull out of the Earth? I mean, all the minerals and resources and stuff that we pull out, huge mines that we've got, pulling enormous amounts of resources out. And we look at our cities, we say, well, look at the cities, they're full of people, all this bustling stuff, and that's why we need all the resources. But go and look on the ground in the city. I mean, where you live, it's not really using all of these resources. It just looks busy on the surface. But all of this stuff isn't really going on. We don't have these huge industrial things going on with all this turnover of stuff happening in our cities and all this stuff being consumed at this enormous rate. We just don't have it. Not when we look at what the resources are that we're pulling out of the earth anyway. I mean, sure, we've got to throw away society. We're always throwing away blenders and toasters and whatever, all sorts of electrical appliances that break all the time. But when you look at the stuff we're pulling out in some of these huge mining operations, you simply have to wonder where it's going. Because really, when you step back and look at it, the earth is being strip mined, and you've got to ask why, how we need all this stuff to support these societies that we have. Because I really can't see where all of it's being used. And it's an interesting question to ask. Why are we strip mining our environment, and why have they hidden history? And if you wanted to hide history, how hard would it be? How long would it take to hide history from the entire human race? And the answer is it would take one generation. One generation to completely re-educate people into what actually happened. All you have to do is distract the generation that exists now and then teach the children something completely different. And when you look at television, you look at modern society, look at how distracted we've all become and what's been done to our children, there it is. You can see how very easily they could hide history from us. I mean, we have history books, but we don't even know how true most of them are. And let's face it, most people don't even read books anymore. Most people are in a situation where all the history they know is what they got from television. In fact, most of all information that people know about anything today, they got from television. So what did happen? And how did we get here? It's an interesting question to ponder. And in fact, asking that question when I was very young was what led me to what I'm doing now. If I'd never asked that question when I was 8 years old, I never would have researched all the stuff I'd researched, and I'd never be speaking to you on the radio now. When I was very, very young, my mother told me they didn't know how the pyramids were built. It kind of sent me on my journey. And once you go down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out what happened in ancient history, it leads you down all the other rabbit holes. And in attempting to answer this question, of course, it's essential that you do go down all these rabbit holes. It's a natural course of events. But what happens is you find that all of them really lead nowhere, because you can go and find out all this information on all these different topics, and at the end of it, it becomes a very real possibility. But then you go down another rabbit hole, and that becomes a very real possibility. And what you find out at the end of it all is that you don't really know. And that's all we do know, is that we don't know. And that's why it becomes very dangerous when people start putting stuff out there and saying this is, and create an argument around it. Because all it really does is tie people up in infighting and argument. And in such an environment, it becomes impossible to get any real focus on the root core of the problem, which is the system itself. The real problem is the fact that this information has been hidden to begin with. So really you've got to look at what the mechanism is that has hidden this information, because in attempting to answer the questions at this stage, all anyone can do is speculate. So see, when you really step back and look at all this and you realize that this is how it's been done, and this hiding of history has been an integral part of creating this conspiracy culture in order to hide the real conspiracy that you're living in a people farm, whatever form it takes, we don't know, but you're living in a people farm that is managed via a system of debt slavery, whereby all the inhabitants are forced to strip mine the earth around them in order to collect the paper they need to pay to be alive. And most people know something's terribly wrong. I mean, that's why they go down the rabbit hole to begin with, but they never really look at the system that holds it all together, which is the money system. And again, many people know the financial system's all corrupt. They know about fiat currency, fractional reserve banking, how it all works, blah, 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 but they never really question the fact that even without the fiat part of the currency, just the mere fact that they have to pay to be alive to begin with, this is a real problem. This is what creates the whole mechanism to begin with. It's the catalyst, it's the glue that holds the whole thing together. And money is something that people simply take for granted, just the fact that it's there. They'd be happy if it wasn't a fiat system, but they still believe that they need money. And once it's imposed in people's thinking, it's very, very difficult to get it out of their thinking. And it may be kind of weird for people to look at things this way and to consider the fact that you're living in a people farm, but whatever you want to call it, however you want to look at it, when you look at what it is, when you step back and look at the whole thing, that's what it is. It's a people farm. and we're pulling the place apart in order to support this farm that we're in. And it doesn't really make sense. None of the stuff we're doing makes any sense. And really, this hiding of history has helped create this situation. As I said, you wouldn't have this conspiracy culture now if it wasn't so difficult to find out what's going on. And you can't really make it really difficult, this difficult to find out what's going on, as difficult as what it is, without hiding history. And that's what they've done. And all you've got to really do is go and travel around the world and look at stuff to see the truth of this. I mean, nothing is what they tell us it is. None of it makes sense. Nothing that they tell us makes sense. None of the timelines make sense. And even some of the stuff that I was talking about before with the Romans and Baalbek and all this sort of stuff, I mean, who says the timeline that we're given for any of this stuff is correct anyway? I mean, we know these Roman civilizations existed. We know these past civilizations were there. But when were they there is the question. Was it all really as long ago as what we think it was? And again, that may seem like a very strange question to ask, but I don't know, folks. I mean, everything we've been told is a lie, so you have to question this as well. And the fact that it's so difficult to really discover too much about the Earth is what has promoted the concept of things such as the Flat Earth Society, the Flat Earth Movement, which has done so much damage to the resistance. It really has. Just the distrust and the divide and conquer and the insults and all the stuff that goes with it. I mean, you can research whatever you want, but you don't have to insult others while you do it. But even when looking at it, you can't blame the flat earthers for what they do. You really can't, because there's so much wrong with the model that we're given. I mean, it doesn't mean it's flat, but there's certainly a lot wrong with what we're told is going on here. So you can understand where they've got the fuel for the fire that they're burning at the moment. And that's why the flat earthers and the globe earthers have got to put down all this fighting with each other and realise that they're both being played and they both have a common enemy, which is the one that created the mystery to begin with. And really, it's the perfect divisive mechanism. It is, because like 20 years ago, I looked into models of the Earth. I looked into the flat Earth, into the round Earth, into the hollow Earth, into the concave Earth, into every type of Earth you could think of. And what I concluded back then is that there is absolutely no model at all that's offered to us that actually explains every question and answers every question. There isn't. I mean, even with the heliocentric model that we're given, it doesn't answer all the questions. A flat model doesn't answer all the questions. None of the models answer all the questions. So it's the perfect divide and conquer mechanism. It's the perfect divisive tool to interject into the resistance right at a crucial time when they're rolling out this whole 5G grid, which is what they've done. So it's really been quite a clever play, but even this play would never have been possible were it not for the fact that they've been able to hide history from us. So we don't really know what's going on at all, which makes it possible for anybody to speculate anything. And if they can get other people to believe it or buy into it, there you go. Divide and conquer, it's the perfect tool, and we do it to ourselves by locking ourselves into a belief system based on second-hand information that we haven't experienced ourselves, and the truth of the matter is that we just don't know. And you can go down as many rabbit holes as you want, folks. You seriously can. I mean, I've gone down rabbit holes for the last 40 years, but what happens when you come out of the other end is you realise that none of them really lead anywhere, and all you've got is all these different ideas of what is possibly going on, what could be happening. But ultimately, you just don't really know, and it gets to the point that you realise that all of these rabbit holes are there, and all of these questions exist to begin with simply because we're not free, so let's establish freedom. Because once we do that, all the doorways will be open. Then we won't have to speculate about what's going on. We'll actually know. Well, at least we'll have a better idea anyway. But as I often say, folks, belief is the enemy of knowledge. And at the moment, all each researcher has, including myself, is what information we have had access to and what we've been able to make of it.